In this movie, we'll be talking about the poems that you need to write for your dedication book. First, some reminders about being poetic. All of these are from our unit, which wasn't that long ago, but never hurts to go over them again. Remember first that poetry is musical. It's meant to be heard aloud. You want to create flow in your writing. Figurative language is important in poetry. If you can't remember what a simile or hyperbole or anything like that is, ask your friends, and if they can't help you, come ask me. And then, of course, remember all sorts of repetition goes into making poems poetic. There's sound repetition, alliteration like crunchy crackers, assonance and consonants where we have the same sounds in the middle of words, and rhyme. Or you could repeat words and phrases, or have structural repetition, where we remember the types of words that you write come in the same order. Swiftly, we ran. Carefully, we crawled. That would be repetition of structure. Now, you have 3 poems, 3 required in your dedication book. I'm going to give you 4 options of types of poems in this movie. You choose the 3 that seem most meaningful to you, or that you could do the best job of, or that you think the person you're dedicating your book to would enjoy the most. Here are the options. The first is an extended metaphor poem, where you will spend an entire poem comparing your person to one other object. The second choice is a memoir poem, where you're sharing a key memory that you have of or with your person. The third option is a concrete poem. Those are the poems that are laid out on the page in the shape of something. And the fourth option is an interior monologue, where you write a poem trying to capture the innermost thoughts of the person you're dedicating your book to. Now let's look at each of these a little more in depth. First, the extended metaphor. Extended means something goes on and on, right? It's for an extended period of time. A metaphor, as we know, is a comparison. Therefore, an extended metaphor is a comparison that goes on and on. In poetry, this means you make one single comparison and carry that same comparison out throughout the entire poem. You do not write, "My mother is like a diamond for this reason," and then two lines later write, "My mother is like the sun for this reason." Instead, you choose one item and compare your mother to that item throughout the entire poem. Now, the process for creating your extended metaphor poem is to first choose the comparison you're going to make, then brainstorm words related to that item. Once you've got a good list the ways your person is like those words, and then use both of your lists to craft your poem. As an example, I might say I'm going to compare my mother to a rose. Words I think of when I think of a rose are beautiful, delicate, thorny. How is my mother like those words? Beautiful. I might talk about her inner beauty and loveliness. Delicate. Maybe my mom is small and dainty. And thorny. Ooh, she can have a sharp tone when she's unhappy. Then I would go on to use these ideas to craft my poem. Here's an example of an extended metaphor poem, comparing children to flowers. Pause here and take a moment to read the poem, and then continue the movie. In order to decide what to compare your person to, if you decide to do a metaphor poem, here are some ideas. If your person were a force of nature, what would he or she be? What about if your person were a piece of clothing, a type of food or drink, a toy or game, something from outer space? What if your person were a location somewhere on Earth, or a time or part of day? Or if your person were a tool or utensil, what would they be? Or there are many other options that you might come up with. The second type of poem you might choose to write is a memoir poem. A memoir, you might remember from your 7th grade study, is a written description of a remembered event. It's told in first person. You talk about I and me. You talk about how you personally experienced this event. It shows what the author learned, you being the author, from the experience. It should show some growth or change in you that happened because of the experience. It's really more about what happened to you than it is about the event itself. If you decide to write a memoir poem, here's the process. You're going to brainstorm memories you have of or with the person you're dedicating your book to, and choose one that was important to you. It was meaningful to you. It impacted you and your development in some way. Then you're going to tell your story in poem form, being sure to show how you changed because of the experience. Here are 2 examples of memoir poems. The one on the left, The Dancing, is about an experience that somebody had back in 1945, which was nearing the end of World War II while the Holocaust was going on and Jews were being killed in Poland and Germany. The one on the right, My Life Through Fish, talks about the fish that a girl has had throughout her life. Pause here and take a moment to read both of these poems. A third choice you have when deciding what kind of poems to make for your dedication book is to make a concrete poem. Concrete poetry is poetry in which the meaning or effect of the poem is communicated partially by the way the words are arranged on the page. The lines of the poem make a shape. Here are some examples of concrete poems, one in the shape of a sailboat and the other in the shape of a swan with its reflection on the water. Notice, these are truly poems in their own right. They do not simply have a random word repeated in order to make the shape. They could stand on their own as poems even if they weren't in the shapes they are, but the shapes add to the poem. Pause and take a moment to read these 2 examples. Your 4th option for types of poems in your poetry, in your dedication book, is an interior monologue poem. The interior of something is the inside. A monologue is one person, comes from the root mono, talking is from the root log. So therefore an interior monologue is one person talking inside. In other words, it's what they say to themselves in their thoughts. So the process is to first brainstorm a list of all the things your person thinks about. If I was using my mom as an example, I might say she sometimes thinks about my brother and I. She sometimes thinks about my dad. She might think about chores that need to be done. She might think about her mother and father who have passed away a long time ago. All sorts of things. Then I would write out some exact phrases and sentences that I think my mom might say, exactly in the words that I think she might use to say them, and then turn my lists into a poem. Now, when I say turn the list into a poem, I don't mean simply list those sentences out one right after the other in a way that makes no sense, but instead blend them to create flow. Here are 2 example interior monologue poems. One is Voice from Vietnam. It's in the voice of a soldier involved in the Vietnam War. The other is Mother to Son, a very well-known poem by Langston Hughes. This is a mother talking to her son, as it says. Notice, too, this poem is also, in addition to being an interior monologue, an extended metaphor poem. It compares life to a stairway throughout the entire thing. So those are the 4 choices that you have: extended metaphor, memoir, concrete poem, or interior monologue. You need to choose 3 of these and write poems to include in your dedication books. The required lengths of each of these poems, or number of words or number of lines for each of these poems, can be found in your direction sheet.